I was standing at the mouth of my own home when two men in police uniforms blocked my driveway, and the woman behind them smiled like she'd already won. I told her calmly that those men weren't real cops. She laughed. 72 hours later, my son walked into her HOA meeting with a federal badge and put her in handcuffs. I didn't always live in conflict. For most of my life, I lived inside stone, literally. My name is Fletcher Wainwright, and for over 30 years, I worked as a geological engineer. Mountains, fault lines, underground water systems. That was my world. So when I found that cave back in the late 80s, carved by nature over millions of years, I didn't see a hole in a cliff. I saw stability. I saw history. I saw something worth protecting. I built my home inside that cave slowly, carefully, legally. Federal permits, state permits, environmental approvals stacked so thick they could have propped up a table. My wife Rosalind helped design the interior while she was fighting cancer. She picked the plants, the way the water flowed through the living space, the way the light hit the limestone in the morning. When she passed, this house became more than a home. It became what was left of us. For years, everything was quiet, peaceful. Then the neighborhood below expanded. Cookie-cutter houses matching mailboxes, identical driveways. And with them came the HOA. The first time Cordelia Ashford showed up, she wore a bright pink power suit and heels that didn't belong anywhere near rock. She smiled too much, asked too little, and spent most of her time scanning my property like she was appraising it for resale. She introduced herself as the president of Crystalline Heights HOA and told me politely at first that my house was a visual concern for her residents. I told her the truth. My land wasn't part of her HOA. Never had been. She nodded, still smiling, and said something that stuck with me. Authority has a way of expanding. A week later, the letters started. Architectural recommendations. Request to alter my exterior block, the view reroute the waterfall lighting. All framed as suggestions. All impossible without destroying the structure. When I refused, the tone changed. The next letter mentioned fines. Another implied county involvement. Another hinted at legal action. I stayed calm. I'd dealt with bureaucracy before. I knew the law. I knew my rights. But then the harassment escalated. Anonymous complaints about structural instability. Surprise inspections. My mailbox flagged as a hazard after sitting in the same spot for 20 years. Inspectors showing up early in the morning, apologetic, clearly uncomfortable doing jobs they didn't believe in. And every time I pushed back, every time I proved compliance, another notice arrived. I started losing sleep. There was a night I sat alone in the living room listening to the waterfall echo off the stone, staring at the plaque with my wife's name on it. And for the first time I wondered if I was the problem, if holding on to this place was selfish, if it would be easier to sell, walk away, let them have it. That thought scared me more than the HOA ever had, because once you start doubting yourself, they've already won. The real turning point came when I realized I wasn't alone. I overheard two men at a hardware store talking about HOA fines, about Cordelia, about people she'd pushed out over the years. Families who sold under market value just to escape the pressure. Elderly neighbors humiliated in meetings. Cars towed from their own driveways. This wasn't enforcement, it was intimidation. Then one afternoon I came home to find two men in dark uniforms standing at my property line. Police-style badges, an SUV labeled Community Patrol. They said they were there on a report of unauthorized construction. Everything about them was wrong. The badges were too clean. No numbers, no agency markings. Their posture screamed borrowed authority. I told them they weren't real cops. One of them reached toward his belt like he expected a gun to be there. It wasn't. I pulled out my phone and started recording. That's when Cordelia stepped out from behind them, arms crossed, enjoying the show. I told her she was making a mistake. She laughed again. That night I called my son. We hadn't been close lately. Conversations had turned short, careful. When I told him what was happening, there was a long pause on the line. Then he said something I didn't understand at the time. Document everything, trust me. I didn't know then that he was a federal agent. I didn't know he'd been watching this from a distance, protecting the case, protecting me. Over the next few days, I dug deeper. Financial records, property sales, Connections between the HOA and a development company tied to Cordelia's family. Fake security. Fake authority. Real corruption. The HOA meeting was supposed to be routine. Cordelia planned to make me the example. She stood at the front calling me disruptive eccentric, a threat to community values. She didn't know the room had changed. She didn't know people were listening differently now. I stood up and asked about missing funds, about shell companies, about fake police officers. She denied everything. Then the doors opened. My son walked in, badge visible, calm as stone. Federal agents behind him. The room went silent. He read the charges. Fraud, conspiracy, impersonation of law enforcement. He put the cuffs on her himself. She looked at me like she'd finally realized she'd picked the wrong fight. That was it. No cheering, no victory speech. Just the sound of metal clicking shut and 17 years of abuse ending in a single moment. Power doesn't disappear quietly, but it always collapses when the truth finally shows up.